Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Nature Connection show with Lisa and Nancy, publishers of Big Blend magazines, and nature photographer Margot Carrera. Welcome back, everybody. Today, Nancy, Margot, and I are thrilled to have environmental attorney, historian, and author Lowell E. Baier return to the show here on the Nature Connection. Lowell was on our show earlier in the year talking about one of his, oh my gosh, he's written a lot of books and he's writing more. But we're going to be talking about his latest one. The other one was, well, there was a two-part series, the Codex of the Endangered Species Act. There was volume 1 and 2, and now he's joining us to talk about Earth's emergency room, saving species as the planet and politics get hotter. And that is so true. The planet and politics, they really are getting hotter. So welcome back. How are you, Lowell?
I'm very well. Thank you.
Glad to have you here. I know Nancy's had her nose buried in Earth's emergency room. I know, Margot, you've been digging into it as well. But do you want to just start by giving everyone, we're going to talk about the Endangered Species Act as always, but I want everyone to know your book is out now, and also go to the website ESA@50.com, and that's the numbers 50 and the AT. So ESA@50.com. The links are in the show notes. And of course, you can get the books wherever books are sold. But can we kind of start off with the Endangered Species Act again for those who need to know about it? Because I know it is kind of a controversial act as well for some people. But if we can just give everybody a reminder of the importance of this act and how we need to hold on to it, because I think it keeps getting under attack.
That's correct. Constantly.
Yeah.
There are, just as an example, statistically, in the last 25 years, there have been 608 bills in Congress to either weaken or repeal the ESA. In the current Congress, there's over 50 right now. None of which have passed both houses, but it's constantly under attack, attempting to either weaken or repeal it.
And what is the reason for that, do you think? What would be the primary reason for that?
Many industries in this country that are large land users, like the farmers, the ranchers, the foresters, the miners, and so forth, have to deal with the requirements of the act if they have endangered species on their property. And it's a time-consuming and frustrating process for many folks, and that's why they're after repealing or weakening it entirely.
Oh, well, and the importance of the act. I mean, because from when I was reading, it seems like the act has, protected species that really need it, and so that we don't do harm and maybe have better management, over areas and the territories of these species. But at the same time as these species get put on the act, some are getting delisted, some are being removed when they maybe shouldn't be. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but it seems to me that we still have species that shouldn't be taken off. And then some are getting delisted because they're really now truly endangered and gone. We were just listening to, an interview yesterday about the honey creepers in Hawaii and how they're having to come up with new ways of bringing mosquitoes in for them to save them. But they're threatened to be basically delisted and gone, right? If something doesn't happen drastically.
Correct. That's correct.
Oh, man. So we got to do things. So tell us about Earth's Emergency Room. That's a good title.
Well, the first two books, volumes 1 and 2, were called the Codex of the Endangered Species Act. The first 50 years, and the other one was the Codex of the Endangered Species Act, the next 50 years. They're very heavy in reading. They're deep in the weeds. They're really for the practitioners, the academics, and so forth, that struggle to understand how the act got to be where it is today. And the publisher said, "Lowell, we need you to write a book that's sort of an abridgment of those two books and something more for the layman's benefit." And so I went ahead and started, and then I realized that over 6 years of research, I had interviewed over 75 people, all on recording, and all the transcripts were typed up. And it was somewhere between 75 and 85 people that I interviewed. And I realized that there was a lot of back stories that people are not even aware of unless you were involved with a particular incident somewhere in America. And those backstories were full of human interest. And so I wrote an abridgment, but I wove into it many of the backstories that I heard. And so it includes, those backstories include sex, drugs, lots of violence, fistfights, a murder, a suicide, perjury, jail time, etc. And so those are interwoven over the 50-year history, and that's what the book is all about.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because, people think that you're doing a book on sex, drugs, and rock and roll. How does that go and tie into, wildlife and endangered species? But in all honesty, I was talking about this with the lady the other day about what happens in our parks and public lands. We have park police for a reason. There's a lot of criminal activity, and that's why our system needs to have more funding, I think, to have more protection. Because, before marijuana was being made legal, a lot of times there were illegal camps of people growing pot in our national forests, which actually does disturb the environment. That kind of agriculture, and not done in a nice way does, you think about, moonshiners back in the day, and I don't want to be mean to moonshiners, but, they would go out and do distilling on the side of a creek, but are they, hurting like a salamander habitat, maybe, things like that. So, when I bring up drugs, there's that. And then there's actual trafficking that happens through our wilderness areas, right?
Well, most people are not even aware of the trafficking of endangered animals worldwide. And and America receives many of those wild animals that are listed as endangered in the countries of origin that they came from, and in this country as well. And so the import of illegal animals taken illegally that are in crisis is a major problem, and that's why we have such strong enforcement within the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Nancy, with you going, and I know you've been buried in the book. Again, everyone, it's Earth's Emergency Room by Lowell E. Baier. Did any of the stories stand out for you that you wanted to talk about today?
The thing that stands out for me, because I've read a lot of books about this subject, because that's where my brain goes, is the dehumanizing of animals, as if animals do not have feelings in a lot of ways. So it's easy to exterminate something you feel doesn't have feelings. But if you go out in nature and you watch, like we've had the opportunity to go out, like in Africa, watching a mother lion with her cubs. And in several examples, I could go on for hours, but I won't, of animals showing love to their children and protecting them as just like a human would. So, when we get to the science world, they kind of take that element out. And that's the thing where I think we become cold and think it's okay to exterminate and take over. that that's the thing that I see as the biggest problem to saving plants and animals and land is the taking out of the caring factor as if it's all about money and it's not, and animals don't have feelings, but I know that they actually do. And that's where I get stumbled. It's a stumbling block for me on how things are handled. I don't know if that answers your question, Lisa, but there
Yeah.
it is.
Lowell, do you want to touch on that?
Well, I do, because I agree with Nancy. I'm an older guy. I'm 84, but I have spent an inordinate amount of time out in nature, not only in America and the North American continent, but around the world,
Cool.
observing
Yeah.
wildlife.
Yeah.
Nancy's correct. When you watch a mother bear or lion or any, birds, and
Yeah.
watch how they care for their young, it's
Hmm.
obvious that expression of caring is prominent, and the like. And if you've had anybody that's had two dogs or more, and one of them passes, the other goes into
Mm-hmm.
really a deep mourning period. I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We've
Yes.
had
Yep.
dogs over the years, always a pair, two or three, and my golly, when one of them passes, it's obvious that the absence of that
Oh,
creature
yeah.
is felt by its mate, by its mates,
Yeah.
and
And
so forth.
like I've seen in a pond, like I've watched fish in a pond. I know it sounds really weird, but you look at fish in a pond out in the wild somewhere, and you will see here comes the adult fish. Now it's hard to tell unless you're really on it, the male from the female. But I know that when you see the stream of babies following, it's the female, and she shows them where to get the food.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find it fascinating because we're just not that different.
Well, this is
Right.
why we're talking about the nature connection, right? Is
Yeah.
about having this connection with nature, getting to
Mm-hmm.
understand nature, the plants and the animals. Like I talk to plants. I know that sounds weird, but I do. We are part, we share DNA with trees and mushrooms
Yes.
and all of that. That's a whole other show
Oh,
and I'll never
hello.
stop. But, we do. And so there's this connection and you talk about this, even in the beginning of the book, about the spiritual connection, right? There's this part, of these connection with animals, but at the same time, there's this connection of not looking them at like getting to understand them. So we appreciate, admire, coexist, but then also not treat them like a toy, right? So when you see about people in Yellowstone, and you bring this up in one of your stories too, people feeding animals and
Yeah.
then getting gorged, and all of these stories we
Mhm.
hear all the time. And it there's this connection we have to have, but I always feel like it's really urgent. So Lowell, you want to talk about that balance and what's in regards to some of the stories in the book
The balance
between
between man and
humans?
nature, or within
Yeah,
nature. Well, yeah,
yeah,
it's very prominent. I do want to make one follow up comment on Nancy's
sure.
observation of feelings. Another way that animals are seriously impacted by man is destruction of their habitat
Mhm.
and their migration patterns. And
Yeah.
man does that without any concern.
Yeah.
Uh, and it is very evident, and it's also a breach of the Endangered Species Act when designated critical habitat is disturbed by man, uh,
Mhm.
and it affects not only the home of the animals, but their food source, and their nesting and areas where they raise the young, and interfere with their whole balance in migration,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. So, getting back to your question, nature does have a balance. Now, when you do see uh, fighting between animals, which occurs, but not very often, it's generally to protect the young.
Mm-hmm.
And nature has a very, we call it the chain of life, if you will, where each depends upon the other for habitat, for food, the prey predator relationship, etc. And when man interferes with that balance, which he does, it is damaging to the creatures. And it's the chain of life, the web. A very senior educator in this area, Aldo Leopold, used to call it the web of life.
Yes.
One creature depends upon the other, whether it's an animal, a fish, aquatic species, insects, and so forth.
Oh, and we got to give a shout out to Aldo Leopold because the Gila Wilderness, the very first wilderness areas and forest, is 100 years old this year, which is awesome. And it's through him, and that's out in southwest New Mexico. And Aldo Leopold is amazing. And I want to touch on what you're saying about also habitat, right? And so we have all these housing communities coming up around the country and around the world. With developers going in, and Nancy and I've seen firsthand. We had a development just before we went on our tour in Tucson. We'd walk every morning, really early before the heat came in, and we got to know where all the birds were nesting and everything. And these developers started developing the land, and there's rules in place of not tearing down saguaros and barrel cactus. And we saw that they just bulldozed anyway, right?
They did it anyway.
And so talk to some environmental assessors for when it comes for water and the environment for when developers happen, environmental engineers. And one lady said to me, she says, Lisa, the problem is that humans are not getting involved beforehand. It's once the developers are already working on a place where hell starts to happen. If there's, we need to get, when somebody goes in for the land and people hear, oh, we're going to save this piece of land for a frog, which happened up in Northern California. And there's certain places, with that kind of thing. And people think, oh, it's only one species. That web of life thing is so important. Like what you're talking about, Lowell, it's so huge, but we do really need to look at this. I mean, every place is so important. And yes, people are going to need homes. So we'll go back into that balance of, do we need a home here? How big do we need this home? Do we need, are we saving acreage when we purchase land? We're seeing a lot of private people do their private land, turning their land into an oasis for wildlife, which I think is amazing that they're learning now to thereby, if they have the funds to do so, buy huge tracts of land, but maintaining it for the wildlife and coexisting as we travel, which I think is because it's not all doom and gloom. It's scary what's happening right now, but we do see these places of joy, when you see people do that, that,
and it's cool, but on the other side of the coin, it's like we have, because we're human and we've decided we have the best brains and we're bigger, better, more effective than wildlife, that we have the right to control them. And this is where we broke the link between the animals and the people. We broke it, and we need to fix it. And we are the ones who cause climate change. We're the ones causing the damage. So I don't think we're all that smart. I know I'm going to get
think we do.
emails
It's
about
just education.
But it's come on, it's about thinking outside the box, thinking about more than yourself, and understanding what you do every time you lay more tarmac and you take away another wilderness area and turn it into a housing project.
Paved paradise.
Yeah.
Margot, what resonated for you?
Let me
Go ahead.
just
Yeah, go ahead.
comment on Nancy's observation. The expansion of the human population is the greatest danger to wildlife and the balance of nature, only because they need a place to have a home, no matter how big or small, but they need a place to have a home. They need to have a place where they can go and shop and get groceries, and they need a place where they can go to work.
Yeah,
and that the expansion for those three requirements is very, very significant, which is the biggest problem with our decimation of habitat. And thank God we have the Wilderness Act and our national parks, and some developers are in fact sensitive and conscious of their impact on the environment and work to restrain it as best they can. But the majority of them just are rampant with their destruction of this to create homes, factories, shopping centers, etc.
Or even their staff doesn't know when they go out there to do the bulldozing, to grade the land. It could be, we stand for this, and you go out, oh, no, not really. Not your actions aren't, so it's really important that us as citizens or non-citizens, whatever, I shouldn't use that word. But us as human beings go out and be part of what's going on in our community. So we can see what's happening to the land. If something is coming in near a wildlife area that is a preserve, the best thing we can do is preserve the next piece of land next to it. We need all these buffer zones and, things like that. And yes, we have to have industry apparently, but we also need to look at our greed. I mean, we're in a digital age, which is great. We're not cutting down as many trees for paper, for magazines, right? But on the flip side, look at all the mining we're doing that's destructing habitats throughout the world for a computer screen. But our big corporate, computer makers want us to have new programs. So therefore, we're like a laptop has 2 to 3 years life, or a cell phone. It's like we keep producing. So we also have to look at our shopping habits and have that communication with who we're buying from, and their sustainability. That's the thing that gets me is everybody's so digital minded, and we are as a company for sure. But there is, how many computers do we really need in a lifespan? That's insane. And then the landfills. But I'm going back to Margot. Margot, what did you think on the book? Earth's Emergency Room, everyone.
Well, I can tell you that I am seeing perhaps here in San Diego a little bit of evidence of that act being kind of taken away little by little. When I moved here, I followed the brown pelican. They were endangered.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there were a lot of new laws at that time, and agencies that were working on restoring and helping them recover. And down here locally, La Jolla Cove is where they go to mate and raise their little ones. And then so as a photographer, I used to go down all the time during that season so that I could take pictures, and little by little they were recovering, and they were saying that they were doing so well that they may be taken off of that. And that was about a span of 30 to 20 years ago. And they did well for a while, but now I'm seeing just in the news recently, they were finding the pelicans dead on the beach.
Oh.
and something is going very wrong for them. It could be climate change, not enough food. It could be, because they raise their, they have their nurse. I call it a nursery for them. In La Jolla Cove, they're quite a sight, and many people come to watch, and many people don't necessarily stay away from them. Like I would take my long angle, camera, and I would, take a distant picture, but I would not go on the rocks where they were mating and have their nests. People are more interested, and they're coming up and they're climbing the rocks, and so that's interfering with their whole cycle. So and I'm wondering also what else is out there as the act is weakened, that is endangering these birds once again, and maybe they need to be put back on the list. If you're finding them on the beach dead, there's something very wrong.
I'd have to look to see, are they still listed? I can't remember. Are they still listed as endangered or threatened?
I would have to look it up as well. I just have a long memory back to where they were doing so well. They were talking about taking it off the list.
Yes. The biggest danger for many of our seabirds is the amount of plastic that's floating around in the ocean. And I'll bet when they do autopsies on those birds, they probably find that they've ingested plastic.
Exactly. And you know what, like as we drive through the country, we stop at rest areas, we'll see this. We'll see some people get out of their car and they take their trash out of their car and they go and put it in the proper trash disposal place. And then we see others who just kick it out on the sidewalk or in the street or like the parking area. They just kick it out and leave their trash. And so you're like, there's two kinds of people. There's the ones who get it and the ones who don't.
Not yet. And I think that's the point about doing books like with what Lowell's written. I mean, isn't that part of what you've done with Earth's Emergency Room, and even using that title? It's like, hello, wake up call. We all end up in the emergency room, and our wildlife is, and our plants, all of that. With your book, isn't that part of like your inspiration is for people to find what they can do? Because maybe it is go clean up the beaches where Margot is, to help the pelicans and to help the other sea life get the plastic off, maybe not use as much plastic. Is that part of your call for this book?
Yes, it is. Anything that does affect the habitat of creatures, all creatures is certainly a theme in that book. I want to comment on Margot's observation of the people climbing out on the rocks and disturbing those brown pelicans. I've talked earlier about tearing up habitat, but even disturbing habitat can upset the balance of for example, mating. The mating cycles of those birds can be interrupted by people going out there to try to, look at them. And that's just another way animals are affected by man is man's intrusion into nature and causing animals to change their behavioral pattern because of it. And that again is just another issue that I've talked about when we talk about the invasion of our habitat, whether it's with a bulldozer or the casual visitor going out and bothering them.
There's a degree of interruption is how I think of it in my mind, where every animal, bird, insect, fish has a, I don't know, I want to say envelope around them that says, don't come closer than this. And we don't know what that is. Like one fish will let you get right next to it, not care, and the other won't. So there's an instinct of an animal, and I think it has to do with in my mind, I say the speed in which they can run away or escape when somebody gets too close. And I feel like humans are in the bumbling stage of not knowing or not caring, I'm not sure which it is, of when you get too close.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy,
it's probably both.
Yeah.
I think, but that's the point of going to parks and engaging in the programs that you can be part of in parks. Like we just did a show on the sequoias, and there was a organization called Hiking My Feelings. And this is a lady and her husband. They created a nonprofit and they work with the Sequoia Parks Conservancy. And the Sequoia Parks Conservancy helps the park system by not only are there regular ranger programs that you can be involved with, but they also bring out people and do programs like dark sky programs. They take people out and teach them the native peoples about the native peoples of the parks, take them on hikes. But this Hiking My Feelings is helping people understand what going through trauma, and they hike and they actually go out, and right now they're getting buffalo orchard grass, excuse me. It's a whole other invasive species that I didn't know about, but now I do. And they go out and through healing nature and helping nature from what destruction we've put in, they're healing themselves. And if you're involved in these kinds of programs, not necessarily just that one, but maybe go on a park ranger hike where you get to understand, oh, look at this bug. Oh, well, this bug is important because this is what feeds this bird and this bird does this.
Exactly.
Then you start to get that web of life. And, the web of life, we learned about that in Kings Canyon. There was a John Muir impersonator and he made everybody stand in a circle and hold hands. And this is pre-COVID, right? And he explained, he says, what are you? What are you? What are you? If you're going to be part of the natural surroundings, and taught us all what the web of life was and how connected we were by holding hands with those different species. And I think that's how we get it. I think it's by books like what Lowell's done. I think it's by doing podcasts. It's anything you can read and learn about. Then you start to really understand. It's humbling and exciting and thrilling at the same time when you start to understand our natural planet. It's amazing. And then you have this real respect for the species. You have a respect for how the law and order works of the natural world. I mean, Lowell, I know you've done a lot of law and order in the human world. My gosh, I'd rather do the law and order of the natural world. But those things help. And as this year, we're talking about things are heating up. Things are. It's either really hot or really cold. Nancy and I have got, we travel full time on our parks tour, and we've seen so many different changes in the weather. It's incredible. I mean, absolutely insane. And we've driven through everything, everything. And now when we look at it, we're going, climate change is definitely real. You can see the landscape changing where, maybe you had 3 months of summer. Now you're having 4 to 5. Well, that changes the landscape, the habitats, which changes how the animals are. So we have that, but you also say politics are getting hotter, and that is like no joke. And that's internationally. I mean, if you look at the fights we're having in this country, we're having them on an international level. And with climate change being our biggest threat, really, think about it. I think it's really important that we vote for nature. What do you think, Lowell? Is that also part of your book, wanting people to look at that of who we are voting for? Are they voting for nature's rights?
The answer is yes, absolutely. People, when they even go to the ballot box, have got to have an environmental conscience about them. and have studied their candidates' positions before they vote. We're so divided in this country, and it seems as though one party is more into promoting capitalism and money making by the major corporations and the like, who fund their campaigns, and the other party is more respectful of the economy and of nature's role in our economy, and have not a focus on the quarterly earnings 4 times a year, but on the bigger picture, the long-term picture of what's going to happen when, for example, pollinators are gone, and the food and drug supply that they pollinate have substantially dropped or been eliminated. We've all gone through the period during the COVID crisis when you would go in, the supply chain had broken down, and you'd go to the store and there would be just empty shelves and the like. Yeah. And why? Why? Well, picture that same problem as climate change increases and the heat increases, and all of a sudden our pollinators are further dying off. And I'm talking primarily of bees, butterflies, birds, and so forth. Do you realize that in the last 25 years, we have lost 9 billion birds, which is 25% of our bird population. The butterfly, just the monarch species alone, we've lost 90 to 95% of both the eastern and western monarch populations, and other butterfly species as well. But everyone knows what a monarch is. That's why I point that out. And and 50% of our drug supply comes from pollinated plants. Out in the countryside. And so I'm very, very concerned about that. And I'm not sure I've responded properly to your question.
Yeah. No, I think you have. I mean, we've got to vote for our nature because our food's going to go away if we don't.
That's right. Long term.
And clean air. Clean air. I mean, if we don't plant trees and do that. Also, in what you're saying too, we're threatened with climate change.
But we're
feeling like we're going
to
have a dust bowl again.
Well,
if we don't watch it. Go ahead, Lowell.
Here's what's going on. We have a biodiversity crisis going on in the world. And biodiversity, in simple definition, it's all living organisms on the planet, whether it be a microorganism or a megafauna. And it includes plants, animals, insects, aquatic species, fish, and so forth. And those all are being affected by this climate change. And it's exacerbating the imbalance of our biodiversity crisis. And it's frightening. Let me give you an example that I've used that seems to resonate with the public. Picture a great big green balloon that's full. A great big green balloon. That's the world. The world of all the species of the world, of all of our biodiversity organisms within that balloon. Every time one of them goes extinct, a little air is left out. And then a little air with the next species that's gone extinct, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, when that balloon is emptied of its species, it collapses and dies. It falls on the floor. And man is just one of the many species within that balloon.
Wow. That's a good analogy for everyone to grasp.
And I think that man thinks they can fix anything. And
Well,
they do. But while we're thinking that we can do and think and fix anything that happens, you can't replace an endangered species.
no,
And
no.
each species, in my mind, is connected to another one, to another one, to another one, and it all leads up to where we are. And we're the ones destroying. We're the ones making fences to keep migrating animals from where they naturally migrate, which is kind of a self-defeating act. Every time we do something against nature, we are killing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's very well put.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
I
it
agree.
really makes me angry.
I know,
But-
but listen, but then the fixing part, we've got to also look at the positive that we can fix things. We have the ability. You know, we're looking at these, you know, while some places are putting up fences and walls, other places are putting up highways, wildlife corridor highways, which are crucial. I love these highways. And it's just, for wildlife, it's something good for wildlife, and that's that coexistence. And I don't know how much data is out there for how well they've worked yet, because a lot of it is pretty new, but there's been some of those highways out there for a while, right? Like maybe at least 10 years, I think. Some of them, maybe up in Wyoming, I think it was, or Montana, that did those highways.
If you were a
Corridors.
bighorn sheep, do you really want to walk on pavement over a bunch of
No, but
traveling cars?
it's not. It's corridors that go over the highways, and like
That's what
wildlife
I'm
corridors.
saying.
Yeah, it's
But
better.
but the wildlife has to learn to
Mhm.
modify their natural behavior to actually walk
Yeah.
on pavement over a bunch of traveling cars that are underneath him, noises,
Yep.
emitting fumes and all
But they're
that.
putting
So
nature on their
yeah,
habitat too. So I
but
think it's a positive. It's a
it's a
positive.
positive, but it's a long-term thing. The animals have to readjust
Well, and that's
to
also a
us.
problem because people
Yeah.
don't like long term.
Well, and
When
neither
it,
do animals.
Nancy, you mentioned about the potential death of man because of all of our species dying off and lack of habitat,
Mhm.
et cetera, et cetera. Let me give you and your listeners a couple of statistics, because
Uh-oh.
the Endangered Species Act is frequently attacked because the naysayers say, well, look, you've only delisted over in the last 50 years, you've only delisted 126 species, and they're on the list today of threatened or endangered. There is between 1,670 and 1,680 species,
Mm.
and it floats back and forth as species are added and delisted.
Detected, yeah.
And
Mm.
what? So the naysayers say, look, you've only delisted 126 species, and also 23 species during this period of the listed species. 23 of them have gone extinct.
Mhm.
So you're not doing a very good job. Well, what they failed to recognize or acknowledge is that of the 1,670 or 80 species, if we did not have an Endangered Species Act, that most of them would be gone already.
Already, yes.
And gone extinct,
Mhm.
but for the recovery and protection under the Endangered Species Act. And I just want to make that point that
Yeah.
how important the act is, because by its very nature, it has saved over 1,670 species.
Yeah, and see, the thing
That's
is,
amazing.
we should have, it's unfortunate we didn't start sooner or modify our personal behaviors, okay,
Well,
before we did all this damage.
Well, John Dingell from Michigan, Congressman John Dingell Jr., introduced the first Endangered Species Act in 1966.
Wow.
He could see and was very concerned about of the extinction that was going on back then. And he amended the act in 69, Congress did, and added foreign species to it. But the act that we deal with today, again, was driven by the champion, John Dingell Jr., in 1973, and it really put some teeth into it. But they were working. There was concern not only in the Congress but across the country back in the early '60s because of the loss and publication of species that were endangered, like whales, the condor, the bald eagle, black-footed ferrets, and whooping crane.
Yeah.
And that's what got the public riled up, because it was their extinction was very potential back then. And so, and John was paying attention. John and I go way, way back. He was a page boy in the House in 1935. I was a page boy in the House in 1956. Yeah, 56. And we always joked about he got there ahead of me. Well, he went on to be elected office after his father passed. He stepped in and took that particular district's position. But at any rate, all I'm saying is there was serious concern back in the 60s because of the notable species that were then endangered.
Yeah. But we've also talked, our late and great friend, Adam Roberts, was very involved in wildlife conversation around the world. He was the CEO of Born Free USA for many years. He went to CITES. We did live broadcasts from CITES, went all over the world whenever he went to CITES to stand up for wildlife. And he made the point about change, that human beings can change without always having to be there in the impact. He talked about the whales, the humpback whales. The world stood up for humpback whales. And he talked about the Midwest, which I know you've got roots there, Lowell, was epic. The Midwesterners who had never maybe even been to the beach yet, right, or to the coast, stood up for humpbacked whales, even if they've never physically seen them. Now, in this day and age, we can turn on any TV show or Animal Planet, David Attenborough. Oh, we love David. You can watch animals around the world and look on your computer, which we have this amazing technology to be able to see that. So we don't actually have to be in their habitat and destroy or destruct, right? And there's scientific evidence, and Margot, we've talked about this, just like what you do as a photographer and your products that you do. Someone can look at a piece of nature, a picture of nature, and it automatically heals us in many ways. Stress release, feel better, be kinder. It has positive effects for us. And so people back in the 60s and 70s stood up for these whales and the whooping cranes and maybe never saw them, but they stood up for them. So I believe in the human spirit of positive change, and I just think we're so focused on arguing instead of actually doing what needs to happen.
Yes.
And so I encourage people to go and get your book, because I think it really, it's stories, and that's the important thing. I think we all connect with stories. And so, and go to Earth's Emergency Room, Saving Species as the Planet and Politics Get Hotter, again by environmental attorney and historian Lowell E. Baier. That's Baier. And keep up with the website. It is ESA, Endangered Species at at 50.com. Go there. But in closing, Margot, anything you have in closing? We could talk for hours.
I know. There was just an example of kind of pulling it all together. The importance of the web of life is what we're talking about, and what Lowell's saying the Species Act is saving or trying to save, is an example. Again, I can only bring it to where I live. The famous Torrey pines here in San Diego are dying right now also because the beetles are destroying them. And I put the question out, when I see that, what bird is missing that normally ate the beetles, that kept the balance of nature? So when you lose a species, whether it's a bird or a bug or, a pollinator, you basically he said, let the air out of that balloon. And what's next? What are we losing next? Maybe it's not a species. Maybe it's a plant. Maybe it's a tree. Maybe it's our water, clean water. It's just, we have to go to the emergency room and take action now and learn from Lowell's book. And just thank you, Lowell, for your work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's a wonderful observation that you have just made, Margot. I really, it's a capital idea and a capital observation. Brilliant. Thank you.
And
Thank
it's
you,
so
Lowell.
true. If you watch outside just your window, okay, into your own garden or backyard, even the street, you will see animals trying to adapt to what we've done.
I want to.
We didn't adapt to them.
No.
We have forced every other species on Earth to adapt to us.
I want
And
to.
we're going to pay for it.
We are, but if we can do the positive change, right? And I
Yes,
love the green balloon.
absolutely.
No, I think I'm
Yeah.
going to put a big green balloon on the
I
back
like
of
it.
my car. I'm like,
Yeah.
I am. It's like, are you going to deflate the back green balloon? I kind of feel like that is such a good thing that every time we do anything, any action,
Yeah.
any purchase,
Just think about it.
any vote, everything, every action we do, right? It's kind of it's a way of making a decision, a good decision. Is this going to deflate or inflate the green balloon to keep the balloon
Yeah, I
floating?
like that.
It's perfect. I want to go back to, you said whooping crane. I don't know if I said it right, Nancy. You always yell at me for not saying, because I say whooping crane, hooping crane. But the cranes, I want to say, Nancy and I had the utter privilege to witness
cool.
whooping cranes in Aransas National Wildlife Refuge this year.
Yeah,
we were very lucky.
Awesome.
And we got there, we were out in the wildlife refuge and saw a couple, and they just how they
were
eat
so
together,
cute.
and they're so streamlined, and how they work together to eat and nurture. I mean, it was this beautiful, magnificent experience, and we saw many other couples, right? And their history, I mean, they really went down to almost none. I mean, I think we were down to 3 or 4, maybe 8 was the maximum number. And, you talk about the Endangered Species Act. And so when you see that you can actually witness these birds, you really feel special, right? Really lucky. But they come down to the Texas Gulf Coast every winter. And now they have a Whooping Crane Festival in Port Aransas, Texas. And this actually started not just there's a Whooping Crane Day, which, it was May 28th this year. And I didn't know all this happened, but it just all kind of, the cranes just kind of enveloped into our life. But, it started with an organization, I think out of Wisconsin, about having a Whooping Crane Day and understanding them. And I think the first time we saw cranes, one of them was in Madison at an arboretum, but these were the whooping cranes. And so here's the success. They went from less than 10 to 505 now. So that sounds great. I think 505 is terrifying, Lowell. I know we've made progress, but I'm like, holy cow, when we see Canada geese everywhere, I want the cranes to be like the Canada geese.
And they can do if we don't keep destroying their habitat. But one thing I noticed while we were watching them and I'm still wondering which is a male or female, because they were often couples. And I noticed that one always was looking out around about while the other one pecked and ate.
Yeah.
And when that one put its head up, the other one would eat and the other one would watch.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have the opportunity to actually go outside and really observe animal behavior, you learn more about humanity than you would think.
And how to work
So,
together.
and what do these birds, animals, insects, plants really need? We're not going to go anywhere without any plants. None of us. We all survive on plants, no matter how you think, because they provide the oxygen. So, we got to start thinking in terms of, if we're going to be selfish, let's be selfish on the right side of the book. Try to save the plants and animals so we can save ourselves.
True.
But yeah, I just want to go back to that 505 of the whooping crane. Well, so we need more, right?
Oh,
we
absolutely.
Shouldn't just go.
That's a very small population number that we need for maximum recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's still a success story, but we're not done, and we're not done. So it's like, yeah, pat yourself on the back, but like now let's
it proves we can do it.
Exactly. That's what I say. You're saying, Nancy, earlier that man always thinks they can fix everything. We can fix things, and maybe we should focus on that and these kinds of things. And Lowell, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a true honor to have you back on the show.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and I'm delighted to share my research with you and all your listeners.
Thank you. And come back when the next book's coming out, because we know you're not stopping. We love that about you.
You're not.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's Nature Connection show. Follow us at bigblendradio.com and keep up with Margot at margotcarrera.etsy.com.